Imagine grabbing a shovel, right, and digging beneath the lawn of the White House. You're expecting to find the sprawling foundations of this massive, heavily fortified command center.
Right, something truly monumental.
Exactly. But instead of a command center, you hit the rotting wood of a tiny one-room farming shed.
Yeah, that's quite a shock.
It's totally jarring. And that almost unbelievable contrast between what the story tells us and what the ground actually holds is exactly what we are plunging into today. Welcome to a brand new deep dive.
Thanks for having me. It really is one of the most fascinating historical puzzles we have. And exploring it completely reshapes how we understand the ancient world.
It really does.
Yeah.
And to guide us through that puzzle, we're looking at a super detailed source for you today. It's an academic lecture script titled The United Monarchy of Israel: History, Memory, and the Archaeological Problem.
And our mission here isn't just to talk about ancient history for the sake of, memorizing dates or whatever.
Right. No one wants a boring history class. We are setting out to compare the stories we all think we know about ancient Israel's absolute golden age, like the legendary era of kings like Saul, David, and Solomon.
Right, we're comparing that narrative with what the dirt, the rocks, and the actual ruins tell us.
Ultimately, we are trying to figure out how nations literally construct their own memories.
Yeah. To set the stage for you, we have to establish the core problem that historians and archaeologists actually wrestle with.
And what's that core problem?
Well, when we step outside the pages of the biblical text and look purely at the historical and archaeological record of the 10th century BCE.
Which is the exact century these kings supposedly ruled, right?
Exactly. When we look at that specific time, there's practically zero physical evidence that a wealthy, centralized United Kingdom ever existed.
Which feels, entirely counterintuitive because the narrative we've inherited is just so massive.
It's huge.
We tend to picture this era like an ancient Near Eastern Camelot, gleaming walls, massive armies, just unimaginable wealth.
That's the popular image, yeah.
So to figure out where this disconnect comes from, let's unpack exactly what the text claims before we grab our shovels and look at the ground.
Good idea. The biblical narrative lays out a very specific upward trajectory.
Right. First, you have Saul, described as this charismatic, unifying military leader who pulls the fractured tribes together.
He serves as the catalyst in the narrative, like the initial spark of statehood.
Yeah, then comes David. David is presented as the classic warrior king.
The conqueror.
Right. He captures Jerusalem, establishes it as his capital, and drastically expands the kingdom's territory through relentless military conquest.
And finally, we get his son, Solomon, and Solomon's reign is portrayed as the absolute zenith.
The peak.
Yeah. He's an international monarch. The text claims he builds a magnificent central temple, maintains a harem of hundreds of foreign wives.
Which represent vast political alliances. Okay.
Exactly. And he supposedly rules a wealthy cosmopolitan court.
And the geographical borders claimed for Solomon are just staggering,
Yes.
stretching all the way from the Euphrates River in the distant north down to the Brook of Egypt in the south.
If we took those borders literally, that would make this united monarchy a dominant superpower.
Like operating on the exact same scale as the great empires of Egypt or Assyria.
Yes, a massive global player.
But, and this is where I get stuck, that completely fractures the logic of the timeline for me.
How so?
It's something that jumps right out at you when you read the narrative closely. If this kingdom was supposedly a stabilized, wealthy superpower on the world stage,
Right.
why does the text admit that the kingdom instantly fractured into two rival states, Israel in the north and Judah in the south, the very second Solomon died?
A great point.
Superpowers don't usually just evaporate overnight into two bickering halves just because one monarch passes away.
No, they don't. That is a crucial inconsistency to catch. And it's the exact detail that makes historians pause.
It just doesn't make sense.
That instant collapse is our first major internal clue. It suggests that the label we use, the United Monarchy, might be masking a much more complicated political reality.
Which, by the way, United Monarchy is a modern scholarly term, right?
Yes, you won't find those exact words in the ancient texts.
Okay, got it.
If the kingdom broke apart that violently and that quickly, it implies the foundational unity was either incredibly fragile or perhaps it never truly existed in the way it was later written down.
Okay, so if the text is giving us a story of unity that ends in immediate fracture, we need an objective referee.
Exactly. We have to look at what the physical earth was doing during the 10th century BCE.
And what does the dirt say?
When we do that, we find a tale of two vastly different realities. Instead of one unified, standardized empire stretching across the Levant, the ground shows two distinct regions moving at entirely different speeds.
Okay, let's break that down.
Let's look at the southern highlands first. This is the region known as Judah, where David and Solomon's capital of Jerusalem was located.
The famous cap?
Right. But the 10th century archaeological evidence there shows only small, unwalled villages. The population is remarkably sparse.
Wow.
And most importantly, there is absolutely no monumental architecture.
And just so we are clear on what that means practically,
Yeah.
when we talk about a lack of monumental architecture, we are talking about the basic infrastructure required to run a kingdom, right?
Yes. To run an empire, you need the actual mechanics of a state.
What does that look like in the dirt?
We look for large administrative centers. We look for standardized weights and measures, which indicate a unified economy.
Oh, like a standardized currency system.
Exactly. We also look for massive storehouses for centralized tax collection, usually paid in grain or oil. And we look for widespread literacy administrative seals, archives, bureaucratic records.
And in 10th century Judah?
We find none of those mechanisms of statehood.
So Judah is essentially a scrappy, developing startup operating out of a garage. It's local, rural, and barely organized.
That captures the scale perfectly. It's very localized.
Well, what about the other half?
If you move to the northern highlands, the region that would become the Kingdom of Israel, the dirt tells a completely different story.
Okay, what's happening up there?
In the north, during that exact same 10th century, we actually see the mechanics of state formation. We see larger, denser populations.
More people, more structure.
Yes. We see complex planned settlements. We see the agricultural surplus necessary to support a class of elites and administrators who aren't farming their own food.
To keep the business analogy going, if Judah is a handful of guys in a garage, Israel in the north is already a functioning mid-level corporation.
Yeah, they have regional managers, logistics, and a supply chain.
But hold on, what about Jerusalem?
Right.
Because Jerusalem is the undisputed centerpiece of this entire historical memory.
It is the focal point of the story.
Right. It's supposed to be the gleaming capital of David, the site of Solomon's magnificent temple, the hub of international diplomacy. Where is all that wealth coming from if they are just a startup?
This is where the archaeological reality check hits the hardest.
Brace me.
The biblical Jerusalem of David and Solomon is described as a sprawling, wealthy metropolis. But stratigraphy, the analysis of the layers of earth and human occupation, reveals that in the 10th century BCE, Jerusalem was just a small, hilltop town.
Seriously, just a town.
Just a small town.
That completely upends the picture. A small town cannot manage an empire stretching to the Euphrates.
It simply can't. There are no grand palaces from the 10th century that have been unearthed. There are no monumental inscriptions boasting of international victories.
What about, like, bureaucratic stuff?
We don't find the massive collections of clay seal impressions called bullae that you would absolutely expect to find in a royal court managing an international trade network.
So when does it actually get big?
Jerusalem doesn't actually develop into a true, heavily populated administrative center until centuries later, specifically during the Assyrian period in the 8th and 7th centuries BCE.
Okay, I'm trying to reconcile this with the famous ruins I've seen in documentaries.
I know exactly what you're going to bring up.
Yeah, I know there are massive, identical gate complexes at ancient sites like Megiddo, Hazor, and Gezer. For decades, those were held up as the ultimate physical proof of Solomon's grand, centralized building projects.
You are bringing up one of the most significant shifts in modern biblical archaeology. Early archaeologists often use the biblical text essentially as a field guide.
Like a treasure map.
Exactly. They read that King Solomon built walls at Megiddo, Hazor, and Gezer. So when they excavated those sites and found impressive six-chambered gates, they immediately labeled them Solomon's gates.
Which makes sense if you trust the text completely.
Right. But science has advanced significantly. We don't just guess based on the text anymore.
How do we date them now?
We use a combination of advanced radiocarbon dating on organic materials like olive pits or seeds trapped beneath the foundations of those gates when they were built.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, and we also analyze shifting pottery typologies. And those modern techniques have forced a massive reevaluation. Most archaeologists now firmly date those massive structures to the 9th century BCE, not the 10th.
Which pushes them a full century after Solomon supposedly lived.
Yes. And perhaps even more significantly, those gates were built by the Omride dynasty.
Wait, I'm not familiar with the Omride dynasty. If they were the ones actually building these massive empire-level structures, why didn't they get the credit in the history books?
The Omrides were kings of the northern kingdom of Israel, specifically figures like King Omri and his son King Ahab.
Ah, Ahab, I've heard of him.
Right. They were incredibly powerful, wealthy monarchs who built massive cities, established international trade with Phoenicia, and fought major wars against the Assyrians.
So they were the real deal.
They were. But the biblical text was ultimately written and edited by authors from the southern kingdom of Judah. And those southern authors despised the northern kings for religious and political reasons.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So the great monumental building projects of the 9th century were later culturally appropriated, in a sense, and credited backward to Solomon to glorify the southern kingdom's history.
That is a fascinating piece of historical theft.
It really is. It's retroactive PR.
So if the 10th century dirt is essentially blank for a massive empire, and the big architectural achievements actually belong to the North in a later century, at what layer of dirt do we finally see the name David actually appear in history?
That's the big question.
Like, is there any physical proof he was even a real person, or is he entirely mythical?
David was absolutely a real person.
Really? How do we know for sure?
We know this because of an extraordinary artifact called the Tel Dan stele.
What exactly is a stele, and how does it prove he existed?
Think of a stele as an ancient stone billboard. Kings would erect these large inscribed monuments in public places to boast about their military victories or decree laws.
Okay, so it's a big bragging stone.
Essentially, yes. The Tel Dan stele was discovered in northern Israel, and it was carved by an Aramean king, a rival of Israel around 840 BCE.
Okay, doing the math there. If David supposedly ruled around 1000 BCE, this stone is from about 150 years after his lifetime.
Correct. On this stone, the Aramean king is bragging about a military victory. He claims he killed the king of Israel and he killed the king of the house of David.
House of David, meaning the kingdom of Judah in the south.
Yes. This is the earliest external non-biblical reference to a Davidic figure ever discovered.
Wow, that's a massive find.
But we have to be analytical about what this inscription actually proves.
Okay, what does it prove?
It proves that by the 9th century BCE, there was a recognized ruling dynasty in Judah that traced its lineage back to a historical founder named David. David was not a myth. He was remembered by foreign kings as the patriarch of that royal line.
That is a crucial distinction. We have hard proof of the man, or at least his dynasty.
We have proof of the dynasty, but, and this is vital, the stele absolutely does not confirm the biblical stories about David's massive empire.
Right. It doesn't say anything about his grand conquest or Solomon's unbelievable wealth.
Exactly. It is evidence of a dynastic memory, not a united monarchy.
It's like finding a 19th century document proving that a guy named John started a small corner store. But later generations of his family claim he actually founded Amazon and controlled global commerce.
That's a brilliant comparison.
We have a real founder, but the scale of his accomplishments has been vastly inflated over time.
Yes, inflated is the perfect word.
Which leads us to the biggest question of this deep dive. If the 10th century empire didn't exist, why did someone go to the immense trouble of writing down that it did?
The motive.
Yeah, who benefits from turning a local, scrappy chieftain into an international emperor?
To understand the motive, we have to fast forward to when historians believe this glorious narrative was actually compiled, edited, and finalized.
And when was that?
Most scholars point to the 7th century BCE, under the reign of a southern king named Josiah.
The 7th century. We are now 300 years after David and Solomon. What is happening in Josiah's world that makes him need this story?
Josiah is facing a once-in-a-lifetime geopolitical power vacuum.
Ooh, tell me more.
For centuries, Judah had been the smaller, weaker sister to the wealthy northern kingdom of Israel, and both of them had been terrorized and subjugated by the massive Assyrian Empire.
The big bully on the block.
Exactly. In fact, a century earlier, the Assyrians had completely destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, turning it into an Assyrian province and scattering its people.
Right, the lost tribes.
Yes. But during Josiah's reign in the 7th century, the Assyrian Empire begins to collapse internally.
Why are they collapsing?
They are overextended, Babylon is rising to challenge them, and they are forced to pull their armies out of the Levant to protect their homeland.
Leaving all that former northern territory territory completely unguarded.
Precisely. Josiah, ruling the small southern kingdom of Judah, suddenly finds himself completely independent.
Oh, wow. Opportunity knocks.
Yes, he looks north, sees the wealthy, agriculturally rich territories of the former kingdom of Israel free from Assyrian control, and he wants to annex them.
I understand wanting the land, but here's my challenge to that theory. If the North was historically wealthier, more advanced, and had operated independently for centuries, why would the surviving Israelites in the North ever buy into a PR campaign from the poorer, smaller South?
It's a fair question.
Wouldn't they see right through Josiah saying, hey, I'm your king now?
In normal times, they absolutely would have rejected him. But these were not normal times. The North had endured horrific trauma.
Ah, because of the Assyrians.
Yes, they had been conquered, their elites were exiled, and their infrastructure was shattered by Assyria. The survivors were desperate for stability, defense, and a restoration of their dignity.
So they were vulnerable.
Exactly. Josiah doesn't just march in with an army, he marches in with a unifying narrative.
How does an ancient king actually pull off a PR campaign of that magnitude before mass media or widespread literacy?
Through the scribal schools and the temple apparatus, Josiah's court scribes actively gathered old oral traditions, northern heroic tales, and southern dynastic records and wove them together.
They just mashed it all up.
They did. This is the era when scholars believe major portions of the historical books of the Bible, like Deuteronomy, were compiled or heavily edited.
What was the core message of the edit?
They essentially created a national history that said, we aren't conquering you, we are reuniting.
Well, that's clever.
Remember the golden days, remember David and Solomon. We used to be one massive, wealthy, unified family, and it was a king from Judah who made us great. If we want that glory back, we have to unite under Jerusalem again.
It is the ultimate corporate merger analogy.
How so?
Like, the smaller company survives a market crash that bankrupted their much larger rival. The smaller company buys up the rival's assets, but to keep the rival's employees from quitting, they rewrite the About Us page on the website.
I love that.
They make it look like they were always one big, happy family, and the smaller company's founder was the one who originally designed everything.
That is a fantastic way to visualize the mechanics of it. They retrojected their 7th century political goals into the distant 10th century past.
So in this crafted narrative, Judah was always the rightful, natural center of worship and power.
And David and Solomon were idealized into flawless founding fathers.
It's brilliant politics. But I mean, just looking at it this way as a piece of political propaganda cheapen the text.
Only if we view it through a narrow, modern lens of fake news versus objective journalism. Ancient writers didn't view history as a mere reporting of dry facts.
How did they view it?
They viewed it as a tool to convey theological truth and national identity. We have to recognize this as nation-building literature.
That makes a lot of sense.
Just as almost all modern cultures create heroic, mythologized founding eras to unify their people during crises, Judah created a golden age to survive the chaos of the collapsing ancient Near East.
So let's pull all these threads together for you listening. We started with the grand blueprint of a massive unified empire.
Right.
We looked at the dirt, which revealed a sparse 10th century Judah acting as a startup, while the North developed into a complex state. We saw how the magnificent architecture of the North was later credited to Solomon. We found the Teldan stele, proving David was a real, historical founder of a dynasty, but not necessarily an emperor.
And finally, we uncovered King Josiah's scribes in the 7th century, weaving this golden age together to justify reuniting a fractured, traumatized land. When you lay the evidence out like that, the consensus of modern historians becomes clear. The 10th century featured a small polity in the south, a larger polity in the north, and no physical evidence of a grand political unity between them.
So it's all a reconstruction.
The United Monarchy is best understood as a later ideological reconstruction.
It really is Camelot. There was a real wooden hut, there was a real chieftain holding a sword, but the gleaming white castles and the massive borders were constructed entirely by the imagination of later generations who desperately needed a beacon of hope.
And that realization leads us to the most profound takeaway from this research. Understanding the gap between archaeology and the text is not about debunking faith or tearing down a religious tradition. It is about recognizing the incredible, enduring power of memory over mere reportage.
Explain the mechanics of that. How does memory become more powerful than reality?
Think about it this way. If the biblical text had simply been a dry, highly accurate reporting of 10th century Judahite tax records and small village boundaries, it would have been completely lost to history.
Yeah, no one remembers tax records.
Exactly, it'd be buried in the sand like thousands of other forgotten ancient archives. But instead, it was a memory of greatness.
And that gave them something to hold on to.
This foundational myth of the united monarchy provided immense theological and cultural resilience. When the people of Judah were eventually conquered themselves and dragged into exile in Babylon, this story gave them an identity to cling to.
Oh, wow.
It explained the historical divisions between the North and the South, not as boring geopolitical realities, but as moral failures, a tragedy of not living up to their golden age.
So the narrative itself acted as an anchor.
Exactly. That narrative was so meticulously crafted, so deeply resonant with human longing for unity and glory, that it successfully shaped Jewish identity and later Christian and Islamic thought for thousands of years.
That's incredible.
The memory became vastly more powerful and, in a cultural sense, much more real than the physical dirt ever was.
The story of the empire managed to outlast the actual empires of stone and bronze. That is a stunning realization.
It really is.
We went looking for the physical rocks of a golden age, and we found something arguably much stronger. A narrative architecture that held a people together through millennia of exile and hardship.
A monument of words.
Yeah. But it does leave you with a lingering, slightly uncomfortable question to ponder long after you take your headphones off.
What's that?
Well, if one of history's most enduring and powerful historical memories, this golden age of absolute unity and wealth, is actually a political reconstruction written centuries later to justify an ancient king's reality. What modern Golden Age stories are we currently projecting backward today?
That's a great question.
Whether it's the myth of a perfectly unified founding generation or the nostalgia for an idyllic 1950s that never quite existed, how much of the world we live in right now is built on memories we invented to justify the present? Something to think about. We'll see you on the next deep dive.